to be that guy that had a regret of I should have followed my passion. Should have, could have, but I chose not to for whatever reason.
You took a long time to act on the pilot thing.
There's always naysayers, right? I hate to say your parents are supportive. My dad had two buddies that were in flying. They have this big pension plan, and his whole retirement was planned out. Bought a condo in Hawaii. Wife was a flight attendant. She was also with United, and here United declared bankruptcy. They lost 2/3 of both of their pensions. So my dad saw all that, over his lifetime in his career, and he didn't want that for me. So he was kind of, he wasn't very supportive of the idea at first. But even before the .com, imploded, I can remember sitting at my desk, grinding away, and still kind of have that niggling feeling. Is this something I really want to see do I see myself doing this for the next 30-something years or more?
That you have a true passion for flying.
I can't imagine doing anything else. I don't want to do anything else. And I knew that.
I'm going to pick up the microphone, get comfy in the studio here. Got a couple notes on the whiteboard. I really enjoyed this conversation. A couple things I want to go over before we get started, class. We'll be very brief. 4 things stood out in my conversation with Brian Shaffert. Brian went ahead and got into finance as a way to get into international law, ended up becoming a pilot. You'll hear the story. I don't want to steal his thunder. But here's the 4 things that stood out. It's the second time I've heard this story. First thing is connection. Connection plays a big part in everything we do. And in this story, and in many of our stories where we're following our passion, there's some connection that enables our ability to do it, shows us the way in some way, shape, or form. Doesn't mean they play like an integral part, right? We do this on our own, but there's always a connection that kind of opens up the possibility in a way it wasn't before, and that's present here. Let me know if you catch it. Secondly, Brian was really good throughout his life at seeing a goal and being able to break down and identify what it was going to take to get there, put those tasks in order, and go ahead and attack it. I think in the armed services, they call that observe, orient, decide, act. Maybe close, there might be another letter in there. Number 3, once Brian made up his mind about, what he was going to do, failure was totally an option. Failure was so on the table, and that's a beautiful thing. You gotta be willing to fail. I mean, it's okay, right? If it makes you come alive and the endeavor towards that leads to failure, that's a good sign. That's present here. Keep an ear out for it. Lastly, affirmations, my favorite. There's a process here, people. Things are much more within reach than maybe you think they are. Your imagination creates the world. There's this reality out here that you can see, touch, smell, and experience. And when that reality meets your imagination, that's when possibilities arise. That's when worlds arise within your head. And when you create those worlds within your head, and you go ahead and focus on them, and you deliver actions into the world that will make that world come alive, the universe will respond and provide you everything you need to see to it that you end up living in just that world. But it requires you to visualize it. It requires you to put in the work. It requires you to be focused every single day. People, enjoy the talent show. Brian, thank you so much for coming on. Here's our conversation.
You just never know their backstory. Especially people you lost contact with over the years, and then all of a sudden you run into them somewhere and you catch up and you realize that throughout this entire time that you haven't seen them or whatever, you've always been like 1 degree of separation the entire time, regardless. So forget where I was, somewhere in the middle of Montana somewhere, and I ran into a guy I was really good friends with in high school, but hadn't seen or talked to since graduation. And, turns out we had a lot of mutual friends that were completely outside of even the geographical area in Malvern, not even associated professionally or through school. And lo and behold, we had like 3 mutual friends. You just don't know that, how you can reconnect all those little dots, but it's funny how it works. I don't know if that made any sense, but hey.
It doesn't. Have you been drinking? Have you been drinking again?
Yeah, pretty much.
Brian, Brian, we're rolling, man. I figured we'd roll right when you started stammering about how you never know. Hey, man, you never know. Listen, you never know. You absolutely never know. And when I met you, you're this pilot guy, whatever. Don't know many pilots, don't know any pilots. But we never really talked about it at all until I had the opportunity to spend some time at your house in Arizona. We just caught a quick conversation, I think maybe during dinner, before dinner, after dinner. I don't know, maybe it was breakfast. I don't remember. But you got to tell me this really cool story. And maybe I won't steal any thunder and set it up. I mean, you're a pilot today, but you haven't always been. How'd you get there?
Well, it's like I'd always been around airplanes since I was a little kid, right? So it's that stereotypical type of situation where you're enamored by something. It's in the background in your life. My dad's 2 best buddies were both, and one went the airline route. The other one was just a private pilot who, was had his own little Beechcraft Bonanza single engine airplane, and we would go up and fly with him periodically, and he would show me how to manipulate the controls and fly the plane a little bit when I was probably, I don't know, the first time maybe 7 or 8, somewhere in that range. So, just playing around little by little. Anyway, it kind of set the seed, and it was always sitting there in the background, just never really got fertilized, if you want to put it that way. Anyway, long story short is, go through high school, college, get out of college, kind of decided I was on a certain path. At the time, I wanted to take a year or so off and just work for a little bit, but I had my eyes set on going to law school and do international law. So that was international business and international law. And work for the IMF was kind of my goal. The International Monetary Fund is kind of where I set my sights. But I needed to save up some money before I went to law school. So I started in finance, working as a financial planner with a company called IDS Financial Services, which was based out in Minneapolis. And they since got bought out by American Express. So it's now Ameriprise. But anyway, it's your basic financial planning, stockbroker. You're on fee-based financial planning, but you also roll in the commission side of things as well. So you're just out there grinding the market, trying to generate clients and whatnot, did that for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years. And then you started to see how that side of the industry likes to manipulate your commission schedule based on whatever product they want to push. So I started having some personal dilemmas with how they did business and how to make a living as a financial advisor working in their system. You kind of had to not do the wrong thing, but not push the best thing for your clients. So long story short, one day the phone rang and it's a recruiter, and they're like, hey, there's a company in your area that's starting up really just a fee only financial planning business. And your name came up through a couple of conversations with other people, and we'd like to have you come in for a visit and talk for a little bit. So I said, what the heck, might as well. They hit me right at the right time. So lo and behold, that turned out to be Vanguard. So they were starting up a whole, this was a departure for them. They were, a do-it-yourself shop. Still are to some extent, but they realized that when people retired, they may have been through their employer, had a 401k, for example, and then they go to retire, and they need advice on what to do at that moment in time to set themselves up for a secure retirement and how to invest the money moving forward. It's a big life decision for for folks. And Vanguard realized that because they had no advice, they were losing a lot of assets. So for them, this was a stopgap measure. And how that worked out was, they were losing these assets to other financial advisors, not necessarily associated with Vanguard, but the money would roll out. So they wanted to put a stopgap in there, which is provide some advice. So they started an asset management trust group, and it really started more with higher net worth people. And so anyway, I got hired there and did that for, it's about 5 years total. But in that time frame, it was I have a bit of an entrepreneurial streak. So this was a startup department within Vanguard. So that intrigued me. So I go there and, I'm the number 3 hire in the group. So, and that grows over time. And then they approached me one day and said, hey, well, let me back up just 1 second. They've been doing that for a few years. And here comes the .com, right? So the .com bubble bursts. And I'm sitting there and taking a lot of flack from some clients who have that mentality. Hey, my best buddy over there is making 30%, 50%, whatever on this stock and that stock. And it just wasn't Vanguard's philosophy to, have students or clients, do that whole spiel with trade individual stocks. It's more of an indexing firm and mutual funds. So, that wasn't their cup of tea. But you get these clients calling all the time, saying, how come I didn't get, you didn't invest or invest in Yahoo or what have you. But then the .com bust rolls around and the phone starts ringing. Everybody starts shouting that everything's imploding. And, it was just day after day. I kind of sat there to myself and go, do I want to be in the cycle of boom and bust for the rest of my career? So that led to me to sit back and go, hey, is this really what I want to do? And just at that same time, they approached me and said, hey, we have a lot of West Coast clients that we need better servicing. We need to open up a shop out in Arizona. Will you consider going out there and getting that ramped up? And I said, the light bulb went off one night when I'm laying in bed wide awake trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And, I said, this is the perfect opportunity to roll 2 things in together. Because, like I said before, that little seed of learning to fly was always in the back of my mind. And, what better place to learn to fly than Arizona where the weather's great. You can just get it done in short order rather than slugging it out somewhere where the weather is more of an issue. So I said, what the heck, I might as well give it a shot and tell them what my master plan would be, which was, sure, I'll go out there and help you start up your department, but how about I give you 2 years, and in that time frame, let me work on flex time. So somehow, the things aligned, and I was meeting a need for them, and I was able to kind of set a path for myself to kind of diverge, and so they agreed to let me do it on flex time. So what I ended up doing is, doing a bunch of research and figuring out what flight schools are in the area. Well, it turns out there's one, luckily enough, the Vanguard office that they're setting up is literally 2 blocks away from the Scottsdale Airport in Arizona. And there's a flight school right there. So called them up and said, hey, what's the program? I said, this is what I want to do. I want to show up early in the morning, knock out a lesson. I'm going to go to the office. I'm going to work all day. Then I'm going to come back and do another lesson, and just bang it out. So Vanguard agreed to it, to let me show up when I needed to show up and leave when I needed to leave, as long as I achieved the goals that they needed when they needed them done. And that gave me the flexibility to get the flight training in while working. So that was kind of a stroke of luck, and the timing, the plan is kind of aligned to make that work. So,
let me ask you to go back, Brian, to the that aha moment, that light bulb. What type of state of mind are you in, right? Like you're really like it's Look, we're in the middle of a pandemic, end of a pandemic, whatever, right? Big shifts. You got a big personal shift going on with education, right? And you're not alone in that. There's education
Yeah.
opportunities galore, right? That's one shift among many. And this was a generation ago, right? Take us back there a little bit if you can.
Mindset at the time was, if I back up, if you remember, going into finance really wasn't where I wanted to be in the long run to begin with, but I was doing really well. So it was a stable career. It has its advantages. It's stable. There's a clear path of, career path that you can follow. And I was on that path and I was doing pretty well. But at the same time, in the back of your mind, you kind of have that niggling feeling that there's more to life than doing this in particular. So it's really just in your own mind saying, am I going to settle or am I going to sit, maybe take a step back and reevaluate what your passions are in life? And from that standpoint, I literally got a piece of paper out and wrote out the pros and cons of sticking with the career path I'm on or breaking that out, breaking away from it and going through and changing careers into something you're more passionate about. And the columns, the pros and cons far outweighed to just follow your passion. I'm young enough at the time. I was early 30s, late 20s, early 30s. So, if there was a time to switch, it was then. And, you just got to take a step back and take an inventory of where your head's at and try to look further down the line and decide if that's something you really want. Is that the track you want to be on, or is there something else? And for me, there was something else. So, I kind of laid out a path of, here's the end goal, and then work backwards to figure out, how to make that strategy work. And you got to take risks. You got to, telling your employer that you have other plans other than working for them. It's a bit nerve-wracking. But
I'd say, to say the least.
You kind of have your cards, and you just put them down on the table and see what happens. And so,
well, stop there for a second.
Yeah.
Stop there for a second. That's a moment, right? Like we talked about the moment there, and I want to get back to that, but let's talk about that moment. Talk about standing in front of your boss, doing that call. What was that like? I mean, that's a real thing that somebody's going to have to do if they want to do something like this and take control. I talked to my buddy Steve, who did the same thing in an entrepreneurial way to start out in an endeavor of his, right? So how'd that go? I mean, it went well, right? But how'd you set it up?
It turned out fine, but before I went into that meeting, I sat down and said, well, what are the pros and cons for them to let me do this? First was I was in a position where, as I mentioned, I was the number 3 person that was initially hired into that group to start it up. So I was familiar with the startup phase, which made me attractive to them to do replicate that same process in a new location. I'd been through that. And, I had all the appropriate licenses and stuff, principal's license and whatnot. So I was in a position to oversee other people. So knowing that ahead of time, I used that, as kind of a sales pitch, more or less. I'm flexible. I'm willing to move out. Relocate. I'll give you the time you need. I will achieve the goals you want. And here, besides that, I've been through this before with you guys. I know what you want. And, also looking forward, you could kind of see that they would want to, grow that department, that they would want other people to succeed behind me. So it's train the trainer. And I'd already done that in that location as well. So using those kinds of highlighting those benefits to them, made it okay for them. That was acceptable to them. It was enough of a trade-off.
Did you go in and sit down with your boss in an office, like buttoned up, suit and tie type of thing, back like we used to do?
No, yeah, it was suit, the whole deal. But it was a win-win for everybody. So, just looking.
So hold on. I want to hold on. So you're sitting down, suit and tie, talking about that. What does he do? What does he say to you? Does he just look at you and say, "Okay, Brian, let's go"?
It caught him off guard. There's no doubt about it. It was kind of
yes.
Like, are you serious? I was on a good track with Vanguard, obviously.
Yeah.
They kind of had visions for me moving up beyond that, which is one of the reasons they want to send me out here to Arizona. Was to kind of move up the ranks within the department as it grew out here in Arizona. So at least they saw that in me. But for me to turn around and say, well, I'm going to leave after 2 years after I get this done, took them a bit back. They didn't give me an answer on the spot. We'll put it that way. They needed to go back and have a little powwow and kind of talk through it. But, the day after, we sat back down again and they said, you know what, this works for everybody. Let's do it. So there you have it. It worked out.
Let's go back to the
dipping your fly and then sitting there waiting for a whole day, was nerve-wracking nonetheless.
Yeah, because a lot of people, especially because you really are putting your neck out there, Brian, when you do that, and anybody else who does, right? You really are. But I'm reminded of a saying that took me when I was first getting into my sales career, which was, hey, is what you're about to do, is there something in your life worth failing for, right? Is there something important enough in your life where even if you were to fail, it's like, okay, this was worth it, right?
Yeah,
and of course there was, right? And with that type of behind me, it was easy to go, right? So
yeah, I mean, the other thing you got to ask yourself is, what's the worst thing that can happen? In this case, it was they say, forget it, and since you're not a team player, why don't you move on down the street? Well, okay,
that would have sucked.
That can happen. It would have sucked, but at the same time, it's if you don't ask, the answer is always no, right? And then two, it's the skill set I had at that time working in finance was marketable.
You were killing it. I mean, that probably had a lot to do with your.
Yeah, I mean, you got to take a risk, but at the same time, how much risk is it really? I mean, you got to take a step back and ask yourself that, is it really that big of a risk? If you're young enough in your career, actually, it doesn't even really matter your age. It's more about how, belief in your own self-worth and what you can, if they say they turned around and said, hey, Brian, that really doesn't work for us. And if you're not a team player, why don't you move down the road? All right, I'll move down the road. The skill set is still marketable for what I was doing. It's rinse and repeat, but it's not, it's unnerving, of course, but,
Do you think that the whole .com time frame had, time of period of time, I guess? Do you think that the whole .com period of time where this was all happening had anything to do with you being able to make that change? Because I reference again today the time of transition we're in, and that was certainly one as well. We're trying to figure out a transition, right? Things were moving again.
Yeah,
so
I think any kind of decision has to have some sort of impetus to make you want to even think about it, right? So there's some sort of trigger. That is definitely a trigger. But even before the .com, imploded, I can remember sitting at my desk, grinding away at and still kind of have that niggling feeling. Is this something I really want to see do I see myself doing this for the next 30 something years or more? And
You took a long time to act on the pilot thing, though. 7 to 20, late 20s. Like, what was going? Yeah, what's going
well,
on in between there?
and this is the other part of that equation. I'm glad you brought that up because, there's always naysayers, right? I've mentioned it before that, to family and friends, I've always had that, it's always been back in the back of my mind to learn to fly. My, hate to say your parents are, not supportive, but as I mentioned, my dad had two buddies that were in flying, one of which was an airline pilot. And my dad and him were best buddies all through elementary school, and they still are to this day. And he saw his buddy go through the trials and tribulations of becoming an airline pilot, where it's boom and bust, where he doesn't even know how many times his buddy's been furloughed in his career through the airlines. And the worst case scenario for him actually happened, which was, here he is, spent 32 years with United Airlines, worked his way up, and now he's flying a 747 from New York to Tokyo twice a month, making high, well into the six figures, and lo and behold, they have this big pension plan, and his whole retirement was planned out. Bought a condo in Hawaii, and he was going to travel for free back and forth to Hawaii in his retirement. And his wife was a flight attendant. She was also with United. And here United declared bankruptcy. And their whole pension fund went to the government program. So they lost 2/3 of both their pensions. And this was a year before he was set to retire. Airline pilots have a age 60 is mandatory retirement at the time. It's since been increased to 65. But he's 59 years old when that happened. And 2/3 of his retirement pension just disappeared, both of theirs. So they had to sell the condo in Hawaii, and he had to figure out a second career from age 60 on to fill in that gap. So my dad saw all that, over his lifetime and his career, and he didn't want that for me. So he was kind of, he wasn't very supportive of the idea at first. So, in fact, a funny story is when I told my parents I was going to move to Arizona with Vanguard, and oh, by the way, I'm going to switch careers in the process, go to flight school. He's like, we need to sit down with my buddy Dave, and you need to talk to him about what his experience was as an airline pilot. I said, sure. So we go out to lunch, and we're talking, and Dave gives me that whole story I just read off to you. And, I didn't ask a whole lot of questions, but I asked one question at the end, which was, Dave, if you had to do it all over again, would you? And he put a big smile on his face and says, you bet. I looked over at my dad and said, there you have it, buddy. So, and that really set it off from there, and I think my parents realized I was dead serious about it. So then they got behind me after that point, but they weren't at first. So you got to work through the naysayers. You kind of have to, if you have a passion for something, people are going to see it, and then they'll start believing, but you got to start with believing in yourself first to even push that agenda down the road, But,
Brian, you're capable, you achieved in the financial world, but were you your own worst naysayer from 7 to 30 to keep you off the tarmac and out of the air?
No, I wouldn't say I was a naysayer with myself at all. It was more, I was trying, I said, coming out of college, I really wanted to get into, international law and international business. But and being in the finance field, I started working with a bunch of attorneys, and then I realized I don't want to be an attorney either. So You know,
So you're
that,
7 years old in
yeah,
the pilot thing. Wait, hold on. You're 7 years old and there's this pilot thing in your head, and it really went away until like
no,
you
like I
said.
said, the seed in the back of your mind, but, um, you know, you know, it's an itch I didn't really scratch until, I kind of got past all the traditional things in life, like get past your education and so on and so forth,
Yeah.
which in hindsight was a great thing because you always have that to fall back on. Had I just like say went from high school and started flying and made that a career without going to college, um, it doesn't really give you much as a safety net. So that was definitely worth doing. And in fact, I didn't get into the airline side of things. I got into corporate aviation instead, um, which to be a pilot, you don't need to have a degree, but it's highly desired. So if you didn't have that, it would inhibit your progress to, you know, it would slow it down for sure. And there would be a ceiling in there at some point. Um, so, you know, and being in aviation, it's dependent upon your health. If you had an incident or accident, your career's over. So you kind of want a bit of a backup and a safety net to begin with, at least in aviation. And that's true of starting a business too. You probably want to have, something else in your back pocket, um, to fall back on. Um, so from that standpoint, it all worked out fine. Um, but to answer your question,
Yep.
that itch was always there. I just wanted to make sure I had something else in my back pocket before I started scratching that itch. So,
So how about tell me about being a corporate pilot and what type of pilot you are, right? Maybe there's going to be some young aviation students looking to looking to get a
yeah,
piece of get a piece of look into that world, right? Get a peek into that world. They don't know what that means. They've read about it. What's it mean for you?
right. Well, I mean, there's a bunch of different routes you could take in aviation. Obviously, airlines are one, corporate pilots another, um, agricultural aviation is another. There's bunches of different careers paths you could take in aviation. Um, for me, I didn't. I don't. Having worked for Vanguard, right, a large corporate company, very conservative. I remember having meetings to decide when we're going to have meetings, and that drove me up the wall down the other side. And I kind of viewed airlines as kind of that institutional kind of mentality. You show up, you fly, you go home. To me, corporate aviation it's a smaller group, bit of a more flexible group. You go to different places every day. You're not flying the same route. Um, just a different approach. But there's trade-offs for that. If I were a young, if I were considering this career now, looking back on it, um, you got to take a step back and go, okay, what suits your personality? Um, Airlines are very structured, which is great for some people. It's not so great for others. In corporate aviation, you got to be extremely flexible. My schedule changes like the wind. So you have to be willing to accept that there's no set schedule, um, for the most part. Now, every corporate flight department might be a little bit different here and there, depending on how it's set up. But taking a step back and look at the major difference between corporate and airlines, one's kind of more free form, the other one's very structured. The airlines, from a career path, is very defined. You go get all your licenses, probably build up a little time doing some flight instructing or banner towing or whatnot. There's a couple other things you could do, fly freight for a little bit. Then you work for a regional airline, flying their smallest airplane in the right seat as a co-pilot, and become a captain in that airplane. And then you move to the next bigger airplane in the right seat, left seat, you just work your way up the ladder. And it's all based on a seniority system. So your schedule, you bid on a schedule based on your seniority number. So if you're new to the game, you got a really high seniority number, you're basically not going to be able to choose your schedule. You're going to be on reserve, and they call you, and that's what you go and do for not a whole lot of pay. But that's changing now, and I'll get into that in a second. Talking about the airlines, but once you get more higher in the seniority, the pay goes up. You get to bid on your schedule. So by the time you're a few years into it, you're pretty much picking your schedule for the next month out, and you know exactly what you're doing for the next month. And then you bid the following month, so on and so forth, to the point where the senior guys are much fine, in the crowd, they get to pick and choose exactly what they want to do, where they want to go, when they want to go, which is great. But, that's years down the line. Shifting over to corporate side, corporate flight departments come in every size. So you kind of have to do a bit of homework, and there's a lot of networking. And it's very, from that standpoint, there's networking is huge. It's because that's where all the best jobs come. Your buddies will tell you, where a good lead is or where a good job is, So, and there's a lot of chat boards out there that are centered around corporate aviation. And I would probably recommend, if someone's thinking about becoming a pilot and trying to decide, jump on some of those chat boards and see the conversations they're having, and get involved in the conversations. Aviation pilots love helping other pilots. And they find out someone's starting or thinking about a career, they're all ears, and they're great. Tons of us are willing to, help out and give advice. And, you make a few relationships there, and before you know it, the phone rings and it's one of the guys you've been talking to saying, hey, we need a guy to come over and fly our Gulfstream, and then boom, that's a lot of how it works in the corporate side. So, but you got to realize it's a lot of fun. I think it's a lot of fun. Corporate pilots do more work than airline pilots. We got to plan everything ourselves. We don't have a dispatcher or, giving us all the weather. We're planning we're doing our own flight plans. I guess
that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So it's, you're a little more involved, and, it's, for me, that kind of was more attractive to kind of my entrepreneurial sense. It's more, more flexible. It's a little smaller group. It's, it's not the same thing every day versus, I would say that is a lot of what the airlines are like. So,
what's your favorite maneuver to hit in the air? Or execute. I'm sorry. Yeah. I mean, I know there's things that you have to do from time to time when the situation calls for it.
Yeah. I mean, you always love a challenge. So for me, that's, flying an ILS approach down to minimums at night is, putting your skills to the test. So, those are always fun.
What does that mean?
Where you can't see outside the airplane, you're shooting approach in the clouds all the way down to 200 feet above the runway at night. So,
okay,
that puts you to test your skills. So,
get the hair on your arms, the back of your neck, and everywhere else to stand up a little bit, maybe. Or what's that like? Is it? Are you chill like LeBron James? Oh my God! Hold on, let me back up. Are you chill? Let me back up. Are you chill? Are you chill like Michael Jordan, or are you? Is your hair? Is there like? Yeah. Okay. What is it like? Yeah.
No. Well, it's your hair staying up on your neck, but at the same time, you've trained for this over and over. You know what I mean? So it's now time to put the training to the test and go do it, right? So I wouldn't say it's like landing on an aircraft carrier in the middle of the night. That's a whole nother I can only imagine what that's like. You know,
No, that's
naval
something you
aviation.
don't think about. That's something you don't think about. I mean, what was the term that you used for that?
Which one? The naval
You
aviation?
said
The
coming
night
in. You said
trap?
coming in. You said coming in on a. When I said what gets you excited, you said coming in on a what? I thought you called it
Yeah,
something.
ILS. It stands for an instrument landing system. So,
Okay.
you can't see out the side of the airplane. You're in the clouds. You're relying solely on your instruments to fly the airplane. So, it's 100% skill basically versus, you can see outside and, it's a lot easier that way.
Yeah.
But
Like when I'm using my rear view mirror to back up or hit a parallel parking situation without like turning over and looking at over my shoulder, it's kind of like that, right?
right. Well, the way I would, yeah, I would just put a blindfold on and do it.
Yeah.
Just looking, but all you can see is like your dash on your car, but you have no peripheral vision. So,
All right. Well, I'll
anyway,
try that next time. I don't know if the cops will like that, but I like you said, I like a challenge
call your
too.
insurance company first.
We'll have to have him on the show. He's one of my friends. He's another entrepreneur.
Awesome. Yeah.
Hey, so like, I don't know. Is there anything else you wanted to talk? I mean, I guess here's another thing I wanted to ask you real quick. It's up for being a pilot in your career, kind of leaning into your passion, and also kind of picking your path as a pilot, right? Not thinking you had to be a certain type of pilot, right? You went in, did something that excites you, right? So yeah,
totally. I mean, there's
So how does that? Yeah,
go ahead.
I was going to ask, like, how has you aligning with you, right? Aligning your career with your passion and you to the degree you have, how has that enabled you to give, right? How has that enabled you to give back to whomever, right? Has it enabled you to be a better person in any specific way that sticks out?
I mean, just like I was saying before, actually looking back on it, the most rewarding part of flying for me was actually flight instructing and teaching other people to fly. And, you teach someone to fly and take off and land, and then you send them up to solo for the first time, and they just come back with a whole new confidence, a whole new, it's a different person from the time they took off, did their 3 touch and goes, and come back and land. They're a different person as a result of it. And that to me was awesome. Moving past flight instructing into the other parts of the career, we've done a lot of cool things. We've done life flights. I've done some things where we'll pick up cancer patients and take them to their treatment. That's really rewarding. I've done some things where flying, doctors to go pick up organs for transplants, and it's all about time, getting from here to there.
How many times have you done that? I mean, if you don't mind me asking. Really? Wow, that's
where I'm in the job now. It was actually kind of common, but for the company I was working for at the time. So you have air ambulance type work that you can do. And you can make a whole career of that in and of itself, doing life flights. So there's a lot of rewarding things there. Lots of cool things.
How about with the family, right? The lifestyle, living this type of life.
It is a lifestyle job, that is for sure, because probably more corporate aviation than the airlines would be. But as I was mentioning before, corporations and individuals own private aircraft because they can come and go as they please and get into airports that are closer to where they want to be. It's a huge time saver for them. So to that end, your schedule is their schedule. So whatever they need is what you need. And you'll find that if you're in the corporate environment, as an entry-level corporate job, you're going to be more susceptible to that than anything else, where you're probably going to be on someone else's schedule, not yours. As you move up and get more experience, like the job I'm in now, I work for a corporation that has 3 jets and we have 13 pilots. So we can take time off. We can work out somewhat of a schedule. There are times still when that schedule changes at the last minute and you got to be flexible. Either our departure time changes or destinations change constantly. So you got to be flexible to deal with that. But the interruptions on your family and your life aren't as great when you can start to, and you have a little more experience in your pocket, you can be a little more selective on your employer. Those quality of life issues, get better with your career as you go. So
what's next for your piloting career? What's on the horizon?
Well, hopefully I'm full circle. I started flying in Scottsdale, Arizona. My professional flight training I started here in Arizona. After 9/11, I found myself back in the East Coast flying, always wanting to come back from Arizona. And one day the phone rang and a recruiter called and said, "Hey, this is a company I used to do some contract work for." They said, "Hey, we know you wanted to get back to Arizona. Can't tell you who's hiring, but would you be interested in coming on the interview?" And I said, "Well, if you can't tell me who the name is, what are they flying?" They told me the aircraft they're flying. So I know exactly who that is because corporate aviation is a small group. And I'm all in. So lo and behold, I ended up getting hired by this company. They're very private, so I don't want to say, but dream job. It was probably, if I had set my eyes on a job when I got into corporate aviation, this was the job I wanted. And lo and behold, you manifest it, and here it is. So back in Arizona again, and hopefully this is started my professional flying career here, and I'll end it here as well. So
how much you believe in the manifesting part of it, Brian? How much do you really believe in that?
It's huge. One of the things I would do for myself to make that work is you kind of have to envision where you want to be, and then you got to write stuff down. You got to put it down on paper, and you got to look at it every day.
Yeah, how do you do that?
I literally wrote it out, typed it up, printed it out, stuck it on my wall in my office, and I'd stare at it all day. And I did something to work towards that goal every single day. And you just go step by step. And as I was mentioning earlier, you kind of have to have a vision of where you want to end up and then work backwards to figure out the steps that get you there. And
where'd you learn that?
One of the benefits of working in finance, we did a lot of training, like Stephen Covey and that type of stuff.
Yeah.
And that was one of his suggestions, and
begin with the end in mind.
Exactly. And then you got to write things down, and every day do something to work towards those goals, even if it's a little step at a time. So that's about it. Yeah.
Well, it's a beautiful thing, man. I thought that was a great conversation.
Yeah, I hope so. Hopefully someone finds some use out of it. Yeah. So.
Yeah, man. Anything else you want to say?
No, just got to get out there and do it. Believe in yourself, and you can make anything happen if you believe in yourself. So.
Yeah, man. So there was no doubt. I mean, we don't have to put that on the final cut. Like, I don't want to pick at it too hard, but when you were building your, and I'm not trying to say you should have regret, right? I'm not trying to play Monday morning quarterback. I'm just trying to get into this itch and where it was and the intensity of it over time. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not trying to say you should, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not trying to get you to look back and be like, I coulda, woulda, shoulda. I'm just curious on like where, if at all, and maybe the answer is it wasn't, right? But were there any big inflection points where this itch showed you something and maybe you said, not now? And was it a pragmatic choice, or was it like, you know what I mean? Like things like that.
Oh, yeah, sure. There's, the process of flight training took, just little over 2 years. And there were some points in there where, it's not cheap. It's, from a financial standpoint, you gotta, when the bills start racking up and you start looking at it and you're like, oh, wow, this isn't cheap. And it's not. But if you're focused on the goal, it's a means to the end, and it's a necessary step to get from here to there. There's moments where it gives you pause, but at the same time, you look at what the goal is, and you look at where you are now and what you're doing now. And, for me, it was clear after writing things down in a kind of pros and cons situation, it was pretty clear I wanted to and needed to make this happen. Another kind of moment of reflection was after I was with Vanguard. I was about a year into starting the department out here in Arizona, and they were like, "Hey, we're promoting you to another position with a nice salary bump." I was like, "Wow, okay, that's pretty nice." Here I'm going to give that up and become a flight instructor to start in my flying career, making a fraction of what that is. Gave me pause. It was another point where you had to take a step back and take an inventory. But a couple of years of sacrifice to get my time in and work my way up in corporate aviation is a small blip in time over the course of your life. And you got to look at that and go, it's just a few years. I can make a lot more money right now, but that's short term. That's not the long term. That's not the long term play. And if you remind yourself of that, you look at those goals you wrote them down for a reason. And, I'm kind of the type of guy, when I decide to take a path, I want to see it through. And that's what I did. You just keep pushing it forward. So, and then it all came out. You're muted, buddy.
Oh,
yeah.
Besides scratching the itch, what's your why?
The why for flying.
The reason you wrote those things down, right? The reason you wrote those things down. Yeah.
You just want to get more out of life, I don't want to be that guy that had a regret of, I should have followed my passion. I could have, but I chose not to for whatever reason. And there's a long list of reasons. And if anyone really sits down and thinks about it, like I did and there's a lot of reasons, but the pros for me were, I can't imagine doing anything else. I don't want to do anything else. And I knew that. So I just stuck with it until it happened. And there you go.
Well, Brian, I've had the pleasure of spending time with you. I know for a fact that you have a true passion for flying. When you told me part of this story when I was at your house there in Arizona, I could feel that 7-year-old's excitement. I really could, right? You're telling me about the things you tell me about the things that you're doing and the things you get excited about. Like it was real. So
yeah, and it still is. I'm into this career now for 23 years or whatever it is, and it's still like that. I get in an airplane, I'm giddy. I'm like, it's weird, and it's so true. They're saying in aviation that it's the disease, and once it gets in your blood, it's there, and it's so true. And it's not just aviation; it can be true for anybody who's got a passion for whatever it is that it is that they like. It's the same thing. So it doesn't have to be aviation.
Yeah, man, and that's what this is for. Show people a slice of real life because it's accessible if you're willing to do simple things like write it down, look at it consistently, put thought into it, and do something to get you closer to that every day. That's a thing you can do, right? Doesn't make it easy, right? Doesn't mean you're gonna not be put up against a situation where you have to make a choice between 3 years of minimum income versus, what you're looking at with the path that you were on, or some other hard choice like that, right? It's the fortitude to make the right choice, commit it to the long-term vision rather than taking the short term, call it a dopamine hit, call it a short-term pleasure, satisfaction, or whatever it is. It's not worth whatever the reason you wrote those things. These are things that you can do, right? They're not hard. They're processes, right? Write it down, look at it, confront with these situations, remember the big picture, remember the why, so you can put them into your mind's formula and how you let things roll out. But you're going to say something?
Yeah, you summed it up perfect. It's a process. That's the key word. And I hate to say it, but it's methodical. And, but once, put one foot in front of the other, and eventually you get to where you want to go.
Amen, brother.
Yeah,
dude, we gotta get together soon, man. How's things going with the I'll hit stop, man. I want to hear how things are going with the fam real quick. Stop recording.
yeah, they're good, man.